Welcome everyone. On behalf of the Australian Institute for Disaster Resilience, I would like to thank you all for joining us for day 2 of the Australian Disaster Resilience Conference Presents Knowledge Week. My name is Michael Arman and I'm the Director of Strategy at the Local Government Association of South Australia, and I'm also a member of this year's Program Committee. This afternoon's session falls under the theme of local leadership, and I'm delighted to be your host. I acknowledge that today I'm hosting this conference from the beautiful lands of the Kaurna people, and I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of various lands on which you all join us from today, and for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this online conference. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connection to the lands and waters across Australia. Before we get into our online session this afternoon, I've just got a few quick housekeeping matters to run us through. We've had a great response yesterday to the networking flashcards that you would have seen flashing before you as we started this afternoon. If you haven't already filled out one, I encourage you to do so, and we'll find some people that we can reach out to and connect with over our afternoon tea. So these will play out in a bit more detail after this session during that afternoon tea. Given we are online, we'd really encourage you to share this conference experience on Twitter using the hashtag ADRC20, and be sure to check out the online posters via the hashtag ADRC20poster as well. We found yesterday a few people had issues viewing the PowerPoint slides. If you do have any trouble, you'll find a PDF copy of the slides on today's program page, along with speaker bios and presentation outlines. The ADA team will share the link with you in the chat window. You'll also see that for today's webinar, we're using the Q&A feature in Zoom for questions. So make sure you keep the questions flowing throughout the presentations as they come to mind, and we'll have some time to explore those after each presentation. So that's really all from me by way of welcomes and housekeeping. So we're going to get straight into it. So please welcome our first presenters, Kathleen, Brannigan and Kate Savage from the Local Government Association of South Australia, who will be presenting on Council Ready, Driving Disaster Risk Reduction at Scale. There will be 5 minutes at the end of their presentations for questions, and I encourage you to keep asking questions through the Q&A box as soon as you think of them, rather than waiting for their session to begin. Over to you, Kate and Kathleen.
Hi, thanks Michael. Thanks everyone for joining us today. It's great to have you all here. As Michael said, I'm Kate and this is Kathleen. So we're just giving a really brief snapshot of Council Ready, the program to date. So we're 2 years into the program. I'll be covering some of the background, the program initiation and how we work, and Kathleen will then be taking over from me and talking a bit more about the key benefits, some of the detail and some takeaway messages. Next please. Thank you. So our program really started a few years ago after the 2016 storm and flood. So councils have always had a role in emergency management, but after this, NDRP had a lot of requests from councils for funding to do projects around emergency management work. So in total, we had about 32 councils, some in groups and some individually, applying for grant funding to do work around emergency management plans, risk assessments, response documents, and they're all quite similar. So in South Australia, unlike some jurisdictions, this is not a legislative requirement. There are some legislative, some requirements, but it's not a fully documented, enforceable requirement that councils have to do this. This is just them knowing that they have to help the community and they want to help their community in emergencies. So the councils were saying, we don't really understand our role. There's lots of plans and arrangements at the state level, and we know we have a part in that, but we're not really sure on what that looks like. We want to progress work, but we're finding it really challenging, so we need some help, really. Next, please. So just to ponder, before we tell you what we do, just have a think about what you would do in this situation, and have a think about that for the rest of the discussion today. Next, please. So as we only have 20 minutes, this is just a summary of the work. But what we did is in stage 1, we went out and spoke to every single council in South Australia. So a lot of the area of South Australia isn't bounded by council, like the APY Aboriginal lands aren't, but we have 68 councils, and we went and spoke to all of them. So that was over 500 people. We also did surveys and document reviews of all the existing emergency management related documents. So that was really quite intense engagement, and the purpose of that was to find out what they already do in this space, what they needed help with, what they wanted support with, where they wanted to get to, and just understand the context that we were going to work in for the next few years. The work was also coordinated through the LGA, so instead of providing funding to all these separate projects, which there's a history of that not working and not providing consistent outcomes across the sector, it was rolled up into a sector-wide project coordinated through the LGA, and the mutual liability scheme kicked in some component funding, so councils didn't have to put in any funding themselves. So it was part of the LGA membership fee, which is a great outcome for all the councils. It's a voluntary project as well, which is important. Next, please. So they told us, well, we know that our communities will continue to be affected by disasters, and a lot of councils are really quite concerned about that, and it takes a lot of their budget as well. And they know they have a role in it. So they know they have a role through disaster risk reduction, to response and to recovery, especially in recovery. They know that they're there for the long haul for their communities. They do a lot of activities as part of their everyday business. So this slide shows some of the activities they do, like fire prevention officers that do waste removal, community development, stormwater, tree management, a whole range of activities that contribute to disaster risk reduction. They also said that we know we have a role, but it's not really very coordinated, it's not documented necessarily, and it's not very strategically placed within council. So they wanted some help with that as well, making it a bit more strategically embedded across the organisation and having a bit more role clarity. Most councils said to us, we want to do this, but we don't have enough resources to do this, especially in regional councils. So we've only got about 1, maybe 2 councils in South Australia that actually have a dedicated person within council who does emergency management. For most councils, it's the side of the desk. You know, I'll get to that when I have time, and they just didn't have the resources to progress themselves. Councils also said, we know we have risks, but we haven't done a real risk assessment. That's something we're interested in doing. We'd like to know what our risks are and understand them a bit better so that we can, proactively manage them into the future. Next, please. So the key insights from this were really that councils are very different. So we've got some very, very small regional councils like Elliston. So some of our councils have 10, 20 staff, they're tiny, up to some really big councils like Underpinning, which is about 900 staff. They've got really just different risk profiles. They've got different histories. So some councils like Teacher Gully and Claywood have a real lived experience of emergencies. They've been through floods and bushfires, and they know how to manage that and how to respond and how to support the communities. So we've got a maturity model that is part of the backbone of this work as well. So our project really works with councils at where they're at now and helps to bring them along in their maturity. So not every council wants to or needs to be an expert in emergency management, but we're just aiming to get people a bit more mature in this space, a bit more organised, and help them get what they want to be. Next, please. Thank you. So after all that engagement, we developed some templates. So this was part of having some consistency across the sector as well. These are all very adaptable templates, and Kathleen will go a bit more into them in the next part of this. They help to clarify some of the roles and responsibilities of councils. They're very modifiable. So we have councils say, look, I'd like my response document to be 10 pages. And that's totally appropriate for a council that has 20 staff. And that's what we give them. So it's great when councils say, this is what we want. And they're really clear on that, because we can give them something that they'll find useful and they'll be able to take away, and it won't be a plan that just sits on a shelf for 10 years or 8 years. There is a lot of work that's not templated in this project. So while I've got these templates there's also a lot more that we offer to councils as well, and that's dependent on what they want and need. And Kathleen again will talk a bit more about that too. Next, please. So at the moment we are working with 66 now, so 66 councils out of 68, and for a program that's voluntary, that's a great outcome. So we've been able to get almost all of our councils on board, and we're fingers crossed for the last two pretty soon, which is fantastic. So we've got together a team of project facilitators who work with the councils. We all have different skill sets, so we can work with them where they need. So I've got a bit of a risk assessment background. Kathleen's got recovery background, so it's quite tailored. So part of our work is workshops. So we've done a number of workshops, and this is part of making emergency management and across council business as well. So we work from we have tree crew to CEO at our workshops, and we have a lot of executive there as well, which is fantastic. And it's about building that capacity in the sector so that when this program finishes, they can do it themselves, really. So we've had over 700 staff involved, again, which is fantastic. We feel that it's really important to get this involvement as well, because we know when things happen in council, it affects most of the council, if not all of the councils. So we think they should be involved and be heard in the planning stage as well. And part of our project that is a benefit for the council is because we're working with so many councils, we hear what's happening in other councils and we can bring that knowledge to councils that we're working with as well. And that helps to mentor them and get them where they need to be as well. So I'll hand over to Kathleen now, and she can fill in a bit more and talk about the benefits of the project as achieved so far.
Thanks, Kate. Kate's spoken about the why and the how of Council Ready. I'll talk a bit about the practical application of the templates and some of the key benefits we've seen. The 17 plus councils have signed up to develop a policy, which is about providing scope and authority for council's role in emergency management, which in the South Australian context is quite important. The policies all look different, they've been tailored to suit each council, and we provide guidance and assistance in reviewing them. Next slide. We've also been developing emergency management plans. That's an example of the City of Victor Harbour workshop with their senior leadership team. So the emergency management process helps councils identify their values, risks, and links the actions council is undertaking to manage these risks to other strategic work, so the links to climate adaptation, public health planning, asset management, and really seeing across their organisation how emergency management fits. We've got many more emergency management plans in the pipeline, and what they really demonstrate is the importance of local knowledge, so the people who live and work in those communities really add some value to that process. Next, please. One of the big things we've been doing is response. So that's about how councils are going to organise themselves during an emergency to support emergency services and their communities. Our program logic, which is another thing that underpins our program, is that the better documentation councils have, the better that they're going to respond. So we use the existing knowledge and insights of council staff, and they have the lived experience. The other part that's really important about response is making sure their workers are safe. Next slide. So other things that we've done outside of our templated documents have been growing and changing over the time. We've done some risk assessments, we've done emergency management exercises, we've worked in recovery planning, worked with elected members about what their role is in emergency management. And more recently, we've been engaged in quite a lot of debriefs. The photo here in this slide is a debrief with Adelaide Hills Council after their involvement with the Kathleen Creek fires. So there was over 30 staff there, and they really valued the opportunity to have an open discussion about what worked, the opportunities for improvement regarding their support for emergency services and their community during those fires. And it really affirmed the importance of response documentation and recent training for them. We also have done some work around recovery planning. So with the City of Playford, they've had quite a lot of experience, unfortunately, in recovery from floods and fires. And so they were really open to doing some recovery planning. We worked with them on a fast and agile process that helped build and create momentum. So it's not about taking a year or 2 years to develop the process. It's actually doing it within, 4 or 5 months from low to go in sort of short, sharp bursts. And that's been something that has been really valued by the participants. So next slide. Another question is, have we helped? So going back to, we had a problem, people needed help, have we actually helped? So what we've heard, if we can have a look at the next slide, please, is feedback from our workshops. So 95% of people of those over 700 people who participated felt really engaged in the process, and it's really positive. Key themes are around shared understanding of roles and responsibilities, open dialogue across council, sharing knowledge and experience, and everyone's views being valued. So it's just as important what the person who goes out on the grader to make a fire break thinks as a CEO, and they've all had their views heard and have told us that they've had those views heard. So the next slide is about our monitoring and evaluation. So this is an independent process that we engage consultants who are doing the monitoring and evaluation. So at this time, there were 65 councils with action plans. We've moved to 66, so as we talked about. And 89% of the survey respondents felt supported. Some of the comments around injecting motivation and enthusiasm in emergency management planning has been part of Council Ready's benefit. Driving clarity around expectations, so having to write stuff down and really talk it through is clarifying what people are going to do and do what they say they're going to do. It's about making sure there's understanding throughout council and remaining flexible. That's really valued by our councils, is the flexibility that each of the project facilitators have been able to bring to the project. So we probably think we're doing okay if we can have a look at the next slide. The benefits are there's a better alignment of plans across councils. Disaster risks are now seen as strategic risks rather than sitting aside from the other strategic risks councils have. Emergency management is becoming the core business of councils, and there's a growing interest in how they can work with the communities to build resilience, and we're looking at hopefully a community-ready program into the future. We skimmed over some of the details. Some of the other things that we've done are adapting national emergency risk assessment guidelines for one of the councils. I've talked a bit about the recovery planning. We've also done COVID incident management team debriefs with about at least half a dozen councils, with more to come. And that's been about the value that we can add to our councils by there's a trusted relationship. They know we've got expertise. So we're being able to work through some of the lessons management frameworks that are probably alien to councils. That's not how they speak, but to really bring some of the emergency management support into that. So I suppose one of the things we talked about when we were planning our presentation, is there anything else that would help you if you were going to do some of the work? And just finally, on the final slide, or not the final slide, the penultimate, sorry, the takeaway messages from us are ask, don't tell. So that's really one of the strengths of our program, has been asking and going and speaking to councils and working with them from the bottom up, as opposed to coming and telling them what they need to do and being the experts. So we work with them. Being flexible to accommodate that broad range of councils that, so some of them are so small that it's lucky that they can even write a document, and that's been our support for them, but also helping refine for those larger councils and to deliver, not to overthink it, to not, it doesn't have to be perfect, it's better than nothing. And we've getting that balance right has been a real challenge, but it's also been something that we think we've done. It's about being fit for purpose for the particular council. So at the moment, we've got just over a year to go, and we're focusing on continuing to deliver on our commitments and finishing well. And finally, I just wanted to show the last slide. So we're part of a team. Some of us are still here, had a couple of people who've moved in and out, but it's to do with the team as well. That's been made the program a great success. So that's pretty much all I want to say, and hopefully got some questions.
Thank you, Kate and Kathleen, for your presentation. Now we've got a number of questions come through on the chat, and you've kept to time, so thank you for that. So we're going to go a few questions throw at you. The first one that's got the most votes is around elected member engagement, which I know you sort of touched on as being something that sort of bubbled up through the program. So the question is, could you share some of the experiences in getting elected councillors to engage with this sort of work? Was it about, confronting the risks, the gaps, the opportunities? So yeah, tell us a bit about your approach to elected member engagement.
So that's been interesting. I've done quite a few different workshops with elected members. Some of it has been around clarifying their roles and responsibilities. So there's been some other great work done by the LGA and elected members' side, but really trying to say that what their role is, because in some of particularly country areas, they've obviously got other hats. So they might be an elected member as well as a volunteer for the local community fire service or CS or something. So one of the things we've done is some work around what their roles are and what does that look like. So using some scenarios, looking at examples of where political leaders have had a really positive role, and also there are times when political leaders haven't been so useful in their role in emergency. So really trying to work through some of that with scenarios. Also helping elected members work around policy points, around understanding council's role in risk reduction, in operations and in recovery, because elected members are, at the end of the day, the community, and the people are every day confronting them and asking them things. So helping them have the tools to have that conversation, I suppose. Would you want to add anything?
Yeah, just that we know that elected members and mayors in particular, I guess, get really affected by incidents, and they do often get a lot of phone calls, and they might get stopped in the street, and it's quite upsetting for them. So it's good to be able to go and have a debrief afterwards, or have a talk before they haven't had an incident, and help prepare them for that.
Thank you. All right, the next one is actually around, where was it? I just lost it. In fact, it just moved on my screen. It was around the events of the summer, and have any of the local councils involved had their plans actually tested in a disaster? If so, what was the result, and were they able to identify any improvements as a result of that?
So I mentioned in the presentation about Adelaide Hills Council. So they were impacted by the Cuddly Creek fires. It started on the 20th of December, and they had their incident management team activated for about a week. Over that period of time, obviously it's been challenging. So we did a debrief workshop with them. We did a bit of a survey. We did about 3 hours and had over 30 people involved. In analysing the data, we came up with 250 individual pieces of data from all that, which we put into a spreadsheet and categorised, and we came up with there were two things. One is that they'd recently adopted a new incident operations manual. They'd exercised and tested it, and they were really positive about how well that had worked. So for us, that was a comfort in our assumption that documentation works and exercising and training works. The other part was really expose some of the areas, not about emergency management operations so much, but how it interacted with the transition back to business as usual and recovery, and how that really, one of the strong recommendations was that it would be great if they developed some recovery plans. There were some minor suggestions around the incident operations, but it was really about those transitions from the actual incident to recovery and business as usual. That were the main points.
Thank you. This one might be for Kate or for Kathleen. The question is about, how about the interface between land use planning and managing hazards and risks for council? I know it's a big issue around disaster risk reduction, is the roles of local government in land use planning. So Kate, can you speak to that?
I'll give it a go. I know in particular a lot of the coastal council is a really big issue for. So one of my councils I work with is York Peninsula, so they've got a 485 kilometres of coastline actually, and a lot of it is looking like it's going to be a bit of a challenge with climate change and sea level rise. So our work does intersect with it that way, in that we're going out and talking to the council about, well, these are the risks and this is what the risks will look like in the future and how are you managing that. Similarly, I imagine fuels and so it's definitely something that we're aware of and councils are aware of too, and that's something we talk about when we do the emergency management plan. So with what the risks and what the risks look like in the future, and land use planning is a big part of that, obviously. Does that answer the question?
So yeah, I guess the other thing I'll quickly add as a chair facilitator as well is that one thing I think the program has grappled with has been around the challenge with the planning reforms that are happening at the state government's been leading.
I was just going to mention that.
Yeah.
Councils.
So the statutory planning environment is a bit fluid and unsure, I suppose, in South Australia at the moment, it feels like.
Another question here coming from a slightly different tact. It says here, a question around, is emergency management seen as part of a broader continuity of operations plan? So I think that's the question there is, I guess around the scope of perhaps some of the emergency management documentation that the program is supporting councils to develop. The language there was around, continuity of operations. How is emergency management seen in that context?
Do you think, Michael, that's about business continuity as well as that intersection between emergency management?
I think so. Yeah, I think that must be a big challenge for councils around. They have all their business continuity challenges in addition to what might be asked of them in terms of emergency management.
Definitely, that's a very common issue that every council has to grapple with. What that looks like when you're dealing with an incident that affects your community and also affects your council. So we help work with them to sort of talk about how that might look and whether you have the same team of people dealing with your BCP issues and emergency management issues, or you have two separate teams and who works in both those teams and how they're structured. So we don't do so much of their BCP. We focus on the community emergency stuff, but that is a discussion that we need to have with councils to clarify how that works together and what will work for them best.
And I think the other part of it is the iResponder program that we have in South Australia, which is about ordinary business in extraordinary situations. So it's not that councils aren't expected in their support for emergency services or their community to do anything that they wouldn't do normally. So, having a water tank or grading a fire trap or collecting rubbish, all those sorts of things are core council business. It's just that they're doing them in a different situation. So I think that's part of how councils can see it as waste collection is their core business. They just have to do more of it if there's a fire. Or we heard in Murray Bridge yesterday about the Thomas Food Fire, is that collecting decaying meat, those sorts of things, but they're still within the scope.
Now we've only got probably a minute left, but there's two questions I want to tackle. We might not get there. But the first is, how have councils matched their commitment with adequate resources to ensure that their emergency management plans are given every opportunity to work? So I think that's a really question around, well, how invested are councils in this process? And the second question, which you might be able to tackle together, is how involved is SAFECOM in this work? SAFECOM being the South Australian Fire and Emergency Services Commission.
Okay. Let's deal with the second one first. SAFECOM's funding the project as well as mutual leaders within the LGA, and they're in our governance group as well. So they provide program oversight along with a lot of the emergency services in South Australia. So we have SAFECOM, SES, CFS, a range of stakeholders that we report to and make sure that we're fulfilling all the milestones and they provide us feedback on how to go about managing the project. So that's in a nutshell how SAFECOM's been very supportive. That's in a nutshell how we work with SAFECOM.
Thinking about the other question about how invested are councils, is that pretty much what it is?
Well, yeah, and around will have councils invested some of their own resources to ensure that the plans that are developed have got the good opportunity to succeed.
Yeah. Well, councils councils, we do have emergency management zones in South Australia, so councils do have a working knowledge of emergency management, and they do have, most councils at least one person who goes to the zone emergency management committee and has, you know, understands the state emergency management arrangements. So that will continue to happen. Councils have been very engaged with the project throughout. So we've got a few councils that are more challenging, and we're still bringing on board now. But overall, most councils have really grasped the opportunity, and we're working with them really well, and they really appreciate the support.
And it's evidenced by the number of people who participate in workshops, those sorts of things, that they actually. So, you know, typically you would get, as we said, senior management, right through to people who do the outdoor work. So it's partly about they're prepared to spend their time because they see the value in it. In an ideal world, I met with a very small council on the Eyre Peninsula last week saying, you've got your response document now. I really hope that next year you're going to update it. You're going to check the phone numbers and those sorts of things. So that's probably for us finishing well, is how do we continue that commitment from councils to emergency management.
Fantastic. That's probably a good place to finish off. So thank you very much, Kathleen and Kate, for your presentation and for engaging so well with these questions.